This week we come to a very interesting point in Mark's Gospel, chapter 13. And I want to give you a few words just to prepare you for what you will hear in the message on Sunday. Mark 13 is often called the Little Apocalypse. It really resembles Revelation much more than it does anything else in the Gospel of Mark. It is, to some scholars, an indication that there were Christian prophetic oracles of the end times circulating in Mark's day that Mark is drawing on to write this piece of his Gospel, chapter 13. It is one of only two instances in the Gospel where Jesus gives lengthy discourses. The first one was in chapter 4, where he gave the discourses on the parables about the seeds and all of this sort of thing. And in chapter 13, he enters the second and final lengthy discourse of his ministry, where he discusses signs of the coming of the Son of Man. Now, some words that you'll hear used a good bit in this week's message are words like apocalypse, which isn't in this text. This is applied to the text as a kind of a genre for thinking about this passage of Scripture. Eschatology, the study of, the thought about the end times and how groups like Jesus's movement or Mark's church or any other period throughout Christian history has thought about the end times. Eschaton, which often is just the word used to denote end time. So this is a particular way of thinking about what this text is trying to do for its original hearers, for Mark's church, and for us. And that is a really key point here that I hope that you will hear. It really matters what ears we are trying to use to hear Mark's message in chapter 13. Do we hear it as Jesus talking to his disciples? He's only talking to 4 disciples in this passage. Do we hear it to Jesus' day as sort of an historical way of thinking about how Jesus was thinking about the end times and teaching his disciples to think about the end times? Do we hear it from Mark's perspective? Around 70 CE, after the destruction of the temple, the razing of Jerusalem, this really traumatic time in history when the Christian movement is struggling to figure out what worship means, what the Christian movement means, what their mission is, and you'll hear something about that mission in chapter 13 this week. So if we hear it from Mark's vantage point, we might hear Mark saying something like, you see all of these things happening around you, very traumatic, very dramatic. This is not the end. The end is still to come, and there is much to do in the meantime. So hear it from Mark's vantage point to see what you think he is trying to communicate to his church. And then we can hear it from our vantage point too. I remember growing up watching television, preachers and things like that. There's this big church in Texas where this very famous preacher who wrote and talked a lot about the end times and the apocalypse and all this sort of thing would have this enormous 40-foot by 60-foot chart behind him with every little kind of occurrence leading up to the rapture and the second coming of Christ and stuff like that. By the way, rapture is not a part of this chapter 13 or a part of most Christian apocalyptic thought in the era. But nevertheless, he had it all kind of mapped out, and he would teach these elaborate sessions about the end times and about what would occur before the end. Well, I want you to hear Mark writing this text, Jesus speaking this text, and listen to all of the points of indeterminacy in the text, the points of unknowing in the text. I mean, for Jesus and for Mark, we can't escape the fact that they live in a particular mindset that may be quite different from ours. There is a definite end time, and it is coming at some point in the future. Mark is being very clear that it is not already here in the destruction of the Jerusalem and stuff like that. So, he has this conception of a real, genuine end time and a second coming of the Son of Man, or a coming of the Son of Man. But so much in the text is about not knowing the time or the day. Not even Jesus knows, he says. Not reading too much into the signs of wars and rumors of wars and all these sorts of things. In fact, at the very end of the text, Mark is doing something here, and Jesus is doing something here in these words that says, basically, when it happens, the signs will be clear. So don't worry too much about what's happening right now. This is not it. The eschaton is still in the future. And there is a particular call in that message of indeterminacy, of unknowing, of anticipation that Mark and Jesus to their particular communities are communicating a message about their particular sense of call in that very time. Not waiting, but doing something important along the way in following the mission of Jesus. So listen for that and try to hear this passage of chapter 13 from those very different sets of ears, if you can, as we explore this text this week. See you then.